Okay, let's take a look at this solving inequalities problem. And before I solve it, I need to do one thing, and that's that I want to figure out, I need a zero here, right? And so I'm going to move the 16x e to the negative x over to the other side. So let's just rewrite this one time before we go ahead and look at the problem and how to solve it. So this is going to be minus 16x e to the negative x, because this is one term. Everything is multiplied together. And so now that's less than or equal to 0. So what we're really looking for is, this is our f of x now, and when is that less than or equal to 0? Okay, well, in order to set up a number line and figure out where that's happening, we first need to figure out where f of x equals 0, and then also where f of x d and e. So I'm going to rewrite this with everything in the denominator now, because notice if you take those e to the negative x like this, you're going to end up with e to the x in the denominator of every part. Then here we have 16x e to the x. And now we're going to say equals 0, because we're actually going to go ahead and try to solve this. Okay, so now I look at this, and I see two things I could factor out of every term. I can factor out a 2, because everything's even here, so I can factor out a 2 and e to the x. So now let's rewrite this in order of a quadratic. We're going to have x squared minus 8x plus 12, and that's equal to 0. So the nice thing at this point is that 2 over e to the x, right, that actually will never equal 0. It will get really close to 0 as x gets larger, but it'll always be 2 over an insanely large number at some point, right? But still, it won't be 0. It's got a horizontal asymptote at 0, and because of that, it's never going to equal 0, so we don't have to worry about it. This also means that it's defined for all real values, as is the quadratic, and so there's no f of x d and e. There's no spot where it does not exist. And so what that means now is that we can just actually concentrate on solving the quadratic. And when we input numbers to test to see where it's positive and negative, we can use just this quadratic, because think about it, no matter what this is, if this is negative, it just goes up to the numerator, becomes a really large number. And if it's positive, it becomes a really small number, but it's still a positive value. And so because of that, we don't have to consider it when we're inputting numbers. Okay, so we get our two zeros by just factoring this, and we get that x equals 6 and x equals 2. Okay, so once I know that, I'm going to put that on my number line so I can get an idea of where it's positive and negative. Now, inputting numbers before and after, you just have to input here. Okay, so here's where I'm inputting numbers, because we already talked about it, but 2 over e to the x will always be positive. So inputting, you can do this in your head, or you can write it out if you want, but 0 is the first number I can input, because that would be this region here. And that one is very clearly positive. And then we have anything between 2 and 6, so I'll input 4. Well, 4 squared is 16 minus 8 times 4, so let's just think about this for a second. 16 minus 8 times 4 is 32 plus 12, and really if you look at this, that's 28 minus 32, which is actually going to be a negative number. So I'm going to go ahead and record that I got a negative value excuse me, for this section of the graph for f of x. And then I go ahead and input 10. Well, 10 squared is pretty easy. I just picked 10 because it's an easy number to square and think about multiplying numbers by. So 10 squared is 100 minus 80. Well, that's still positive, and then plus 12, so that's going to be positive. Okay, so let's write our final answer. We're going to say f of x is less than or equal to 0, less than or equal to 0, and that's going to be on just this small interval in the middle. And now, because we have less than or equal to, we're going to include the 2, and we're also going to include the 6, and that's why they get a bracket. So our final answer here, I'm just going to write it a little neater here, is going to be that f of x is less than 0 from 2 to 6, and that's the only spot on the graph where it'll be negative. And now we're done with this one.